All right guys, mid-workout, thought I'd pause and make a video here giving you guys key things that really kept me in the game. By that I mean working out since I was 16, never took over a week off, never had any major injury other than like maybe a minor like back tweak here or there. So I'm gonna go over those things with you. As always, if you guys like this stuff, like, share, subscribe. If you guys have not already done so, I want to give you guys some straightforward, no nonsense advice for guys over 40. Also doing so 100% natural, no compounds, peptides, anything of the like. Point number one might be the most controversial, and that is simply I never really lived by or really was a slave to mobility drills and excessive stretching routines. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. And I've heard since I was a young person, man, you're gonna have to stretch when you get older. You gotta spend more time kind of doing that. And that is definitely something I've benchmarked in a bullet point. However, a big caveat to that and a big believer of that is if you kind of baby yourself and or think or try to avoid certain movements or activities, things specifically that are full range of motion, like deep squats, and just overall kind of general range of motion stuff with your shoulders, I believe you might be doing yourself more of a disservice than a service, because I find people that start later in life, the biggest thing is essentially you use it or lose it. And so if you spent many years, even a few months to a year, not doing a lot of physical activity and or limiting your full range of motion activities, not saying everything has to be done full range of motion, you really lose out on some of that key flexibility that's really overall the best functional thing you can do for the longevity and health of your joints. Next thing is not being dogmatic in training styles, programs, or methodologies. I've experimented with all sorts of stuff, went down little niches here and there, and really at the end of the day, always trying to absorb it and kind of make it my own. If I were to kind of pigeon myself into a category, even though I don't even think this is really a fair point, I'd say I'm more kind of into bodybuilding. Oh, never was some to like really measured with a fine-tooth comb, like body fat percentages, not want to take pictures with my shirt off, had no desire of competing on stage. But I certainly have gone down, especially when it first came on the scene, things like progressive calisthenics, body weight training, which is really coming, I think, probably more or less in its peak now, maybe I'd say, with a lot of people. Of course, did bodybuilding when I first started. I think bodybuilding more or less influences from the magazines and the trainers and the like in like the 90s. Did the functional training thing for a long period of time, absorbed some of the kettlebell fads that first came in. Again, nothing wrong with any of these things at all whatsoever, but I have found that when I kind of put myself in a pigeonhole or a niche, I found that going back to point number one, some aches and pains started kind of creeping up because I was so dogmatic on sticking to it a particular program and methodology that I just wasn't simply listening to my body and going towards where I felt like was most natural and also more importantly, most sustainable. Really hard to not grant in that particular area, but I do just think that if you are pigeonholing yourself in a particular area and you gotta be benchmarking at this head, if you're following a particular guru or system or community, odds are, again, they're hell-bent in that community and in that content. That from a business perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to really deviate from that. And of course, they're gonna present the next best thing since sliced bread. They don't tell you kind of the negative stories of which in every single community I can tell you there's always a story or at least a deficit that they may be kind of putting off and not sharing to the public. And the third point, I think I will piggyback on that, is that I still kind of train more or less like a bodybuilder. And what I mean by that, again, is not looking to go on stage. Certainly I've built up a certain amount of aesthetics that I personally like and I want to keep that going. I just find that bodybuilding-esque training, hitting various body parts, working for more hypertrophy, moderate intensity, and of course all different ways to kind of skin a cat here. I have just found that that seems to be the most flexible in really kind of hitting strength-based goals, aesthetic goals, not to mention just metabolism. I stress this a lot with my one-on-one clients, that just the benefits of just getting and doing resistance training is just really the metabolic health, being able to consume and a lot of calories, you can use them efficiently. All that to say, I think bodybuilding training has really protected me from really injuring my joints or sustaining any kind of serious injury, because I'm not going to chase radical PRs. Yes, I'll go through phases where I'll kind of lift with some heavy weights from here and there, but I'm really kind of stimulating my body, rest, recuperating, hitting different body parts when necessary, and if I feel like I'm overworked a particular body part, I'll just take a step back, take the day off, and then pick up where I left off on the next routine. Next point of going along with all this stuff is I've always really tried to enjoy my training. And I have found when I was really a stickler and saying, I'm just gonna go hardcore into this training, I wanna break this PR, or I have this program, I really wanna follow it, even back when I was doing, say, like Olympic lifting, that is pretty hard on your body. I'll just say that if you actually follow a true Olympic lifting program with a lot of cleans, a lot of snatches and variations of that my joints, tendons, ligaments, slowly but surely started creeping up. And again, I was fortunate enough, I never really hurt anything, but I got just to that red line where my brain was telling me, I don't feel like doing this today. My mental discipline and everything that I was reading through the book said, we gotta break these PRs, we gotta stick to the program. That eventually, I think what really kind of made me kind of segue away from this program is at the end of the day, I just simply wasn't enjoying my training. That just unconsciously, my body would eventually steer me away from that either pick up something new and adapt it or kind of go back to my classical way of working out and this kind of amalgamation of how I kind of take all these various disciplines and kind of combine them into my own. Next one also might be a little controversial, and I say this is kind of like the not so secret to building muscle, and that is I always kept up a very hearty appetite. Sometimes a little more so than I should have, especially in my youth, always thinking that eating and more calories is always a better thing, that maybe was always the best advice always. But I do think, and I found that if I keep a sustainable, good diet that's kind of hearty and always kind of feeding up where I feel like was left off, I always find I can put a little more effort in the gym and recover just a little bit faster. Versus I also think it's kind of common sense, if I redline stuff or I push really hard and I'm trying to be at a caloric deficit, not only is my recovery not going to be good, building muscle is just not going to be there, and just mentally, psychologically, I'm just, again, going back to the previous points, not going to enjoy my training. And I think the fastest way to really put on kind of good muscle is come in the gym, be consistent, but then also make sure you're kind of fueling the tank and putting those building blocks in place so your body has the raw materials to actually go ahead and build muscle. Next one, again, I would say is kind of underneath the whole umbrella here, and that is I really try to avoid repetitive stress. So going back to bodybuilding training, I think that inherently has that kind of baked into the basic programming compared to, say, powerlifting, where it's just bench, squat, deadlift, or even say something if you're a runner and you only do running. I would say, again, not medical advice, but based on what I've seen through observation and people I've talked to, and even myself personally, if you only do running or do a lot of consistent cardio on just that same body part, eventually over time, it's not an if, but it's going to be a when until something kind of breaks. So with me, especially, I was getting over 40, and I've said this in a previous video on this channel, I really adapt to my abilities. And maybe if you're just starting out, you have to adapt a certain way, and then you can kind of try and kind of evolve and open your doors up to other range of motion exercises and techniques that are available to you. But the point is, I'm not forcing something that feels uncomfortable. Yes, some things initially will feel a little bit uncomfortable, and your body has a good way of kind of fine-tuning and kind of working around that. Even something as simple as getting like in a front squat position, this felt uncomfortable the first time I started doing it. Now, even after kind of years taking off, I can still get back into a front squat position, not uncomfortable at all for my wrists and even elbows and shoulders. So it's hard to say what really causes that. All I will say is that you got to start where you're at, slowly kind of adapt. Yes, a little bit of discomfort is always going to be present, but just kind of use your common sense. Don't force through exercises and programs and intensities if your body is telling you otherwise. Next one is always kind of in the back of my brain, and that is always kind of working and keeping my back strong. I'm a big believer, again, lower back strength is really paramount. When I first started out lifting in high school, and I always complained of like lower back pains and stuff, was kind of aching with myself. Once I kind of dialed down kind of good positioning, even something as simple as kind of hinging at your hips and really taking the glutes, taking some of that work versus say your lower back, a lot of the back pain, stress, and I'd also say risk of hurting your back greatly diminishes. Anytime I'm hinging at my hips, I'm always thinking about, and in some way, shape, or form, that's going to be in a roundabout way to help kind of strengthen my back. And I have certain tools that I use once in a while that also I think help strengthen the back. I'm a huge believer that if you get your glutes nice and strong and as a nice solid base, that is one of the best prophylactic exercises or things you can kind of build up that'll help protect your back. And next one I made a whole separate video on that I'd say I do this kind of intuitively, but also I kind of program this stuff in some way, shape, or form into my programming, and also some ways I've actually neglected this, unfortunately. I shared that in the previous video, but that is doing some heavy short range of motion, or at least some periods of heavy weight training alongside some light, long range of motion exercises. So I called it the light and long, heavy, short method. That is where you're going through some periods of time doing some heavy weightlifting through shorter ranges of motion. Again, as you get older, you're less susceptible to kind of hurting your joints by doing it this way. You're also working at maybe the strongest position. Your joints are less susceptible. Case in point would be saying you want to do things like heavy chest presses right here at like 90 degrees versus going all the way down. Just heard a similar story from somebody who said same thing when I presented this concept to them. They kind of snapped a tendon or some sort of bicep or some sort of pec muscle because they thought in their head they had to touch their chest. Even though their body was telling them don't do this with this amount of weight, they kept doing it, and sure enough, they kind of hurt themselves, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Versus, I still think there's a lot of benefits to training heavy, and then you can reap some of those benefits even at lower ranges of the motion. But as we get older, and for me personally, I'm gonna be kind of mindful, even if it's something as simple as a deep squat. I'll do deep squats from time to time, but I'm not gonna load up super heavy. I might load up more so super heavy on shorter ranges of motion where I'm not going as low, and also where my joints and muscles are also at their strongest. So to me, I feel like that's you kind of reap the best benefits and are less susceptible to injury. Cool, but that is it though, guys. Hopefully that is helpful. I wanted to keep this really concise, and also because I want to get back into my workout here, but I wanted to give you guys something to walk away with that I think are some of the most key foundational things that are going through my mind and some of the things that I coach with people one-on-one. Not trying to make this promotional plug at all, but if you are interested in kind of doing some one-on-one coaching, feel free to reach out to me down below in the description box. Hopefully you guys are enjoying your week. I will see you guys in the next one.